Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel where I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail around a new feature that has recently been added to Fantasy Grounds Unity, called token lighting. This feature introduces the ability for Fantasy Grounds to provide in-map lighting in relation to tokens and is something that can be controlled by the DM or by the player. However, in order for you to use this feature, you must be running Fantasy Grounds Unity 4.1 or higher, which was released as of May 2021 and is the version token lighting was officially introduced with. As there are two paths of learning in relation to manipulating token lighting, I'm going to break this into two separate videos, one for the Dungeon Master and one for players. The first part is going to be around how the DM handles token lighting effects and what options they have in order to ensure the players get the best experience out of this feature. The other video will cover what options exist for players and how you as a player can make use of token lighting to alleviate some of your issues for your character within a map. Both videos will be released at the same time to ensure everyone is equally able to understand how to make use of this new feature. And while there is additional lighting functionality that was added to Fantasy Grounds Unity in relation to the maps directly, this two-part series is only going to cover the aspects of this feature that relate directly to character or creature tokens. So with that, let's get started with the DM's side of this feature. I highly recommend you follow along within your own Fantasy Grounds Unity campaign, as it is really the best way to learn how to make use of a new feature, and that's really through hands-on experience. I suggest that you load up a map that has line of sight functionality enabled, because it will help showcase how the line of sight and token lighting can work together to create some very interesting environments for the player to move around in. For this tutorial, I will be using one of the maps from the Lost Mines of Phandelver campaign. So I'm going to quickly open that up here, and I'm going to open up the Cragmaw hideout for the players and push that to the background of the screen here. If, however, you do not own this campaign, I will provide the links in the description below for you to be able to purchase the module. It's been out for quite a while, so it should be something that everyone or close to everyone should have at least close on hand. Now, the reason why I've chosen this map is that Smiteworks already has line of sight functionality enabled, and we can confirm this by switching to the line of sight modification tab. And as we can see, all these red and green lines indicate that line of sight functionality is there and ready to go. Now, in order to prepare this for our tutorial, the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you've unlocked the ability to see the data panel here. You're going to select this die icon if it isn't already selected, and then you're going to ensure that you enable disable lighting. You should see something adjust within the actual map, and that's pretty much the enablement of ambient lighting, something we're going to temporarily want to turn off. The next thing you're going to want to do is go over to the lighting button here, which is right next to the line of sight one. Select ambient lighting, and then turn off ambient lighting so that we can really showcase what's going on here. The next thing that you're going to want to do is enable something called Player Vision Preview. And this is so that we can see what the token is going to see, which is, by definition, what the player is going to see. And again, that is under the play option here, and you need to enable this feature here. And you will see that your screen should go black across the whole thing because we don't have any tokens on the map yet. To deal with token lighting, we are going to want to return to the lighting option here, menu item, and then ensure that we enable this third icon in called Token Light. And this puts us in line with being able to now apply lights to individual tokens as we add them to the map. But we're also going to want to add some tokens. So I've gone ahead and created a combat tracker entry here. And I've got a druid who is a half-elf that has dark vision, a human cleric who is unable to see in the dark, a vampire, and an ape, just to provide a little bit of variety. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop these into the area of the map that is in the upper right quadrant of this particular map itself. And it doesn't really matter where in this area you place them for now. The idea here is that you're going to be able to see what the token sees. So if I select this human or the ape, they're essentially blind in this cave. Whereas if I select the druid and the vampire, they have dark vision, so they're able to see a little bit further. The first thing I'm going to do is give the human cleric a candle. As we can see, right now, there is nothing around them that they can see. All I have to do is choose one of these presets here and select candle. And then with the token selected, you can tell it's selected by the green circle that is around it. I'm going to click this little add light button. And now that we can see there's sort of a brightish location of light around the character, and then a dim area of light that has now appeared around the character. And the line of sight functionality has come into play with these pillars in the sense that there are shadows that are now being cast behind them. And a really nice feature that I like about this is that the candle, if you look very closely, is flickering, which would be normal behavior when you're walking around with a candle in a potentially windy cavern. And if I select any of the other tokens here, they will also see a subtle flickering, because we're essentially seeing what they themselves can see. Now, there is something I want to point out. If I take this ape, who isn't really able to see anything else except the area around where the candle is, and I move them to a location, which, by the way, you can't do when you're in the light manipulation thing. You have to switch back to play. If I move them to an area that puts them just out of line of sight on the character, what we will see is that the light disappears, which to a certain degree is somewhat realistic, but at the same time not, because the line of sight does work in the sense that they should be able to see the dim light in this area here where the vampire is standing. And if I move them back, the only reason they can now see it is because a portion of their visibility is now crossing the token's icon. That is literally the only reason why we can actually see the light source again. If I move them back out of range, it goes away. There's no light source. So there's something else here that I'd also like to point out. I've moved the vampire further away from the human player. And you may notice that the bulk of this cavern is in black and white, but the area around the cleric is in orange. It's got an orangish, yellowish glow around it. And that's because of how dark vision works. Essentially, if there is dim to bright light here, then anyone with dark vision is going to see that as if it was daylight. The rest of the cavern that is in total darkness is going to be dim light to them. So this is going to be the differences between what dim light looks like versus what full daylight is going to look like on a map. Now let's go ahead and upgrade the character's candle to an actual torch. To do that, all you have to do is ensure that you have the character selected once again. They are already set with a light. All you then have to do is change the type. And it will reassign the light that is now assigned to them, and we can see that they can now see much further in the cavern. This area here is a daylight area, and then it slowly fades off when it comes to the rest of the cavern. Now, if I go ahead and move this character, we will see, once again, you got to be in play mode, we will see that the light will follow with them. That's because the light itself is assigned to the actual token. It is not assigned to this location of the map. So if I move them here, then the light itself shifts. Now, if I go ahead and actually choose the ape, so I'm going to move the cleric back to this location again. Oops, I didn't want to open them up. I'm going to select the ape. You'll notice that there's a little segment here of this cavern that the ape can now see. Even though the lighting itself isn't going to be casting any visible light in the area where the ape is going to be able to see it until they can see the token, some of the areas around them are still going to become visible. So if I move the ape into this terrain area, or essentially the staircase, you will see that the area becomes exposed. And once again, the second that the visibility of the ape to see even a portion of that cleric's icon, the light becomes enabled. So this is something that is going to have to be either adjusted, or we're going to have to simply get used to how it works in the sense of actually seeing when the light is going to be there, but the shadows will still uncover certain areas. Now, there's something else that I would like to point out here. You will see that with this character, they can't see behind this pillar. That's because the torchlight is casting a long shadow behind that pillar. In addition to that, the ape is casting his own visibility shadow, if you will, on this end of this pillar. I like how this is working to a certain degree because we got to remember when we select the ape, we're looking at the visibility factors of the map from the ape's point of view. If I were to choose, for example, the vampire, we're now looking at that map's point of visibility from their perspective. So the shadow behind the pillar goes away because they can see through that shadow. But obviously they can't see through the pillar, so the pillar itself casts a shadow behind it. Same if we go with this direction. And if we look here, the cleric is casting a shadow off in this direction because of the way that the light is casting a shadow off in this direction, as well as their own level of visibility. Now, I'm going to choose this half-elf here, and I'm going to give them a different kind of light. I'm going to give them a darkness spell, and you're going to love what happens next. Oh, come on. Sometimes it takes a little bit to actually get that to work. Okay, there we go. So now it applied. You may have noticed the human cleric's torch is no longer casting any light. That's because they're within the sphere of the actual effect of the spell of darkness. Anyone outside will still see that light, which in one aspect is going to be a little bit weird, but in the other, it only applies to dark vision related characters, true sight or blindside characters. And that is because, once again, the vampire's own dark vision is coming into play. So they now see a circle around where the actual elf is because that's where the darkness spell is. The ape will lose all visibility because all of a sudden the torch is now gone. That is exactly what we would expect from this kind of result. Now, if I move the human, back out of the area where the darkness spell is cast, we can now see that the light becomes visible again and that the ape is able to see once again. And again, they can also see the effects of the spell, or the circumference of the spell, if you will. The elf, however, is still in the dark, and you may notice that this darkness spell has overridden their own dark vision. That is perfect. That's what's supposed to happen. If I move the vampire in, they begin to lose visibility as soon as they cross that threshold. Now, I'm going to go ahead and delete this spell of darkness around this character. I'm going to do that by selecting the token, and then I'm going to click this button, and that's going to remove the spell. That means that everyone else in the room is now able to see areas of this particular map again. I'm also going to take the human and I'm going to give them a lantern. And the reason why I'm doing that is because a lantern casts a much longer area of light. At the same time, everyone is now able to see in this room as if it was daylight because of how bright a lantern is in this particular case. But something that you may not have noticed is that you can change the color. So I can adjust the color spectrum that lantern is cast in, and depending on the type of gas that they might be burning in that lantern, will determine what color that light is going to be. But you can adjust it by simply moving things around here, and you'll have to figure out what, say, argon might burn as if they're using argon, which I don't know if they have here, but helium, hydrogen, normal gasoline, whatever, oil lamp, lanterns, whatever. Different kinds of lights will cast different light colors. But at the same time, if someone has cast a light spell, so let me do that. Let me add a light spell to this character. Theoretically, as part of a signature of a mage, they could decide to make that light blue, or they could make that light green. It's entirely up to them, and this only really applies with the newer rule sets that have been introduced in the last year or so, because you can now adjust or add a little bit of quote-unquote personal touch to a spell to make it unique in your own. Everyone generally casts a white light, but not everyone really wants to. Maybe they want to do a green one, or maybe a red one, or pinkish, magenta, whatever. It's going to be entirely up to the character. So this shows that you have a high degree of flexibility with these particular lights. Now, why did that go away? Yeah, there are still a few minor issues with this, but they're relatively minor. Now, another thing that I would like to point out is that it is also possible to adjust the range of light. So, for example, we could set it up where this lantern is only able to cast 5 foot in the way of light. So if you had a hooded lantern, for example, then you could reduce the range that the light is being cast when it's hooded over, but then increase it again when the hood is taken off. That's kind of cool. And then the fall off here, really all that is if you look at the boundary, you can see that this boundary here is the hard boundary between where dim light starts and the light itself essentially finishes. There's a little bit of feathering that comes into play here to sort of provide a little bit of a transition point between the hard edge of the bright light versus the hard edge of the dim light. It just gives it a softness to it. If you don't like that, you could actually reduce the fall off to 0, and you'll see where that hard edge is. So, looks like 1 is really as low as you can go. Now, generally, didn't reapply that, so I'll just click lantern. So if you want to reset anything, just go ahead and hit the lantern again. I don't have the token set, that's why. Lantern, there we go. Now, you can also adjust the dim light distance. So you may have noticed that I had 5 foot of light there. That didn't really deal with the total range of the dimness. I could reduce that as well to say 10 feet. And now we can see that the dim light zone, if you will, reduces. So we can go ahead and make some fine adjustments to all of these after the fact, or you can create your own and then assign it so it wouldn't have a preset. The problem is you can't save that. And that's my only complaint about this. Now, something else that I would like to point out, and anyone who is susceptible to flashing lights, this is a bit of a warning for you. I'm about to introduce a couple of things that will cause a little bit of blinking and flashing here. So please, if you have to, don't hesitate to look away. When I selected the candle, it had something called a flickering behavior. That is set by this candle preset, but there's also a behavior preset. So right now we can see that it is kind of flickering. There are 3 different types of presets that exist outside of the standard none. There's a pulsating one, which sort of makes it go like it is now. I don't really know how to describe that other than say it's pulsating. And then the other option is that you can make it flash, so it can turn on and off. Really, that would be only useful for like an industrial light of some kind or anything like that, but the possibility is there. And the distance, I'll put it back to the flash. The speed with which that happens can be adjusted up to a full range of 9999. And as you can see, it goes really, really quickly. So I'll reduce that just so that people don't get sick. But you can adjust how frequent that light blinks, what the pulsating rate is, or what the flicker is based on the actual speed. So if I put flickering, for example, at 9999, you can see that it goes really quickly and it starts to play around with the dimness of the candle on its reach. So it's not necessarily realistic that a candle would flicker that frequently. Now, if you want to set it back to the default, which is either 0 or 100, depending on the behavior of the preset here, all you have to really do, if I set this to 600, for example, I can hit backspace and it will set it to 100 by default. But you have to hit enter in order to put it back to that. The other option is you could use this slider. So if you have something that is higher than 100, as we can see here, and then I use the slider, it will only adjust it to a value within that slider range. So while it is possible to put something higher in there, it's generally not recommended. Other options that you can do is toggle off and on darkness. So if you may have noticed that when I put the darkness spell on, the darkness toggle went on. Whereas if I put the light spell, the darkness toggle goes away. You can also toggle whether a light casts shadows or not. And I'm going to select that again to get rid of that. So if you do that, you'll notice that there's a bit of behavior on how the shadows behave. With shadows off, there's no anti-aliasing that takes place with the edge of the shadows. Whereas with shadows on, there's a bit of a smoothness that now happens and comes into play. And that is really just the difference between the line of sight functionality kicking in versus the lighting functionality sort of overlaying on top of the line of sight functionality. But that really brings us to the end of this DM's portion of the tutorial. And as we can see, from a DM's perspective, this gives you quite a bit of control over the individual light sources for tokens, and you can very quickly assign lights to a character who says they are going to hold a torch or a candle, but there are still a couple of issues with this. The torch will never go away unless someone remembers to remove it, and if a party is in a dungeon for an extended period of time, unless they say they're using more torches, that first one will eventually go out. And another limitation of the interface is that you cannot save your own presets, or at least not that I know of. It would be nice if there was that save option, even if there was a chat command that would allow you to do it and create a preset for future use, but unfortunately it doesn't exist as far as I can tell. Otherwise, I really do like this new feature from a DM's perspective, but it has added a little bit more of a workload to my games. In the next part, we're going to look at how we can reduce some of this workload by showing how players can create their own effects for things like torches and whatnot, so that you don't have to link a light source to their token directly. They can do it themselves. In addition to that, I'm going to show you how you can set something up so that it expires, such as a torch, for example. So I hope you enjoyed this part of the tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you in the second part. Thank you. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.